Hello Year 2, it's Mrs. Bailey here with part 2 of Peter Pan. So we now know that Wendy, John and Michael have flown with Peter Pan to Neverland. Now Neverland, you should have realised, is actually not a real place. It's actually inside your imagination and is different in every single person. My Neverland is very different to yours and very different to Miss Griffith. Hello. So there's a section in the story that you are going to need to answer some of the questions today, which is from the original book. So I'm actually going to read just this page so that you are aware of this, so that you can answer the question in the comprehension. So have a good listen to this. This is back in the nursery before Peter, Wendy, Michael and John fly to Neverland, and it's before Peter has his shadow sewn back on. So she gave him a look of the most intense admiration, and he thought it was because he had run away, but it was really because he knew fairies. Wendy had lived such a home life that to know fairies struck her as quite delightful. She poured out questions about them, to his surprise, for they were rather a nuisance to him, getting in his way and so on, and indeed he sometimes had to give them a hiding. That means a smack on the bottom. Still, he liked them on the whole, and he told her about the beginning of fairies, how they were born. You see, Wendy, when the first baby laughed for the first time, its laugh broke into 1,000 tiny pieces, and they all went skipping about, and that was the beginning of fairies. Tedious talk this, but being a stay-at-home, she liked it, and so he went on good-naturedly, there ought to be one fairy for every boy and every girl. Ought to be? Isn't there? No. You see, children know such a lot nowadays. They don't believe in fairies. And every time a child says, I don't believe in fairies, there is a fairy somewhere that falls down dead. Really? He thought they had talked enough about fairies, and it struck him that Tinker Bell was keeping very, very quiet. I can't think where she's gone to, he said, rising, and he called Tink by name. Wendy's heart fluttered with such a thrill. Peter, she cried, clutching him, you don't mean to tell me that there's a fairy in this room right now? She was just here now, he said a little impatiently. You don't hear her, do you? And they both listened very carefully. The only sound I can hear, said Wendy, is a little tinkle of bells. Well, that's Tink. That's the fairy language. I think I can hear her too. The sound came from a chest of drawers, and Peter made a merry face. No one could ever look quite so merry as Peter, and the loveliest of gurgles was his laugh. He had his first laugh still from when he was a baby. Well, we're going to stop there because that little snippet is what you need today for one of the questions in your text, in your comprehension. So I hope you remember that, and if not, go back and have a listen again as well. So here we go, part 2, ready for Tuesday's comprehension. We got to the part where Hook answered Peter and his face became very stern. So John knew of Hook's reputation. He was Blackbeard's bosun, John whispered huskily. He is the worst of them all. What is he like? Is he big? Wendy asked. He's not so big as he was, Peter said. How do you mean? I cut off a bit of him. His right hand, said Peter. Then he can't fight now. He has an iron hook instead of a right hand, and he claws with it, said Peter. They flew on in scared silence. It was the stillest silence they had ever known. To Michael, the loneliness was dreadful. If only something would make a sound, he cried, as if, in answer to his request, the air was rent by the most tremendous crash he had ever heard. The pirates had fired at them. The roar of it echoed through the mountains and seemed to cry out at them, when at last the heavens were steady. And you can actually see in my pop-up book the cannon being fired at them from the boat behind here. So if I tilt it that way, you can see the pirate ship and then the cannon being fired at them. So when at last the heavens were steady, again Peter had been carried by the wind of the shot far, far out to sea, while Wendy was blown upwards with no companion but Tinker Bell. Oh dear, we know that's not so good, because Tinker Bell doesn't like Wendy that much. Tink at once began to lure Wendy to her destruction. Tink was not all bad, or rather she was all bad just now, but on the other hand sometimes she was all good, because you see fairies have to be one thing or the other. They can't be both at the same time, because being so small they unfortunately only have room to feel one thing at a time. So she was jealous of Wendy at that time, who did not yet know that Tink hated her. And also, bewildered and staggering in flight, Wendy followed Tink for safety. Oh, now I think we're going to meet the Lost Boys here. You can just about see if I get into my camera. There we go. The Lost Boys in the front part of my picture here. It says the Lost Boys were out looking for Peter. The pirates were out looking for the Lost Boys. And the Redskins, they the Indians, were out looking for the pirates. Phew. They're going round and round in circles, looking for each other, round and round the island. But they did not meet because they were all going at the same rate, the same pace, all around the island, so they never ever met up. The boys on the island varied in number, but at this time there were 6 of them, counting the twins as 2. First, Tootles was not the least brave, but the most unfortunate of all the gallant band. Next came Nibs, followed by Slightly, who danced ecstatically to his own tunes. So ecstatically means really excitedly. Curly was 4th, and then the twins. The boys vanished in the gloom, and after a pause the pirates were on their track. In the midst of the pirates was James Hook. He lay at his ease in a rough chariot drawn and propelled by his men, and instead of a right hand he had an iron hook with which he encouraged them to increase their pace. On the trail of the pirates came the Indians, the Redskins, of the island, every one of them with his eyes peeled. They carried tomahawks and knives, and their bodies gleamed with paint and oil. Bringing up the rear, the place of the greatest danger, came Tiger Lily, proudly erected, the princess of the Indians, of the Redskins. They all passed a gigantic crocodile. Now we know what that crocodile's done. The first to fall out of the moving circle were the boys. Rabbits could not have disappeared more quickly than the boys. Each boy retreated, that means they went back to the 7 large trees that they called home. Each tree had a hollow trunk with a hole in, as large as each boy. The entrances to these homes were what Hook was searching for to try and find. "I do wish Peter would come back," every one of them said nervously. And here's Hook in my book. He's not a very nice character, and his head seems to get stuck when he pops up. There he is. So, meanwhile, above the ground, Hook was plotting. Most of all, Hook was saying passionately, "I want their captain, Peter Pan. 'Twas he that cut off my arm." The captain brandished the hook threateningly. "I've waited long to shake his hand with the hook." Let's see what happens. "Peter flung my arm," he said, wincing, "to a crocodile that happened to be passing by." "I have often," said Smead, and this is Smead, which you probably know from the Disney character Smead. There he is. "I have often," said Smead, "noticed your strange dread of crocodiles, sir." "Not of crocodiles," Hook corrected him, "but of that one crocodile. That crocodile would have had me before this, but by lucky chance it swallowed a clock that goes tick, 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 and so before it can reach me I hear the tick, and bolt means I move really quickly." He laughed, but in a hollow way, and sat down on a large mushroom. What a funny place to sit, on a mushroom. "Smee," he said, "this seat's really, really hot." He jumped up out of his off the mushroom. They examined the mushroom and tried to pull it up. It came away at once, for it had no root underneath it to hold it down. Strange still, smoke began to ascend. That means it went up. The pirates looked at one another. "A chimney!" they exclaimed. They had discovered the chimney of the home under the ground. In their excitement they danced and they sang, but they never finished, for another sound made them still. Tick, 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 tick. The crocodile's coming. It was indeed the crocodile. Hook stood shuddering, 1 foot in the air. "The crocodile!" he gasped, and bounded away, followed by Smee. Wow, we'll leave it there. And then the next week we will have a little look at the underground home of all the lost boys and where Wendy will be to help them. Have a lovely Monday and Tuesday, Year 2. I hope you've had a nice weekend despite the rain. We miss you all, so take care and we'll see you soon. Bye bye.